Hi, this is John Linneball from John Linneball Tutoring, and this is Elements to Know for the SAT Part 3, Logos. So in case you haven't seen the first two videos on Ethos and Pathos, I'll go over this generalized SAT essay prompt. So as you read the passage below, consider how the author, normally this would be the author's real name, uses evidence such as facts or examples to support claims, reasonings to develop ideas and connect claims and evidence, and stylistic or persuasive evidence such as word choice or appeals to emotion to add power to the ideas expressed. So you're going to write an idea in which you explain how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her audience that the author's claim, whatever the author's claim is true. So in your essay, analyze how the author uses one or more of the features listed in the box above, so that'd be this box here, evidence, reasoning, stylistic, or persuasive elements, to strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of his or her argument. Be sure that the analysis focuses on the most relevant features of the passage. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with the author's claims, but rather how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her audience. So looking at the next slide here, same SAT prompt, essay that's generalized because it doesn't really matter what the author's name is. It's always going to be the same. It doesn't matter whether the author's male or female, and it doesn't matter what the author's point is. They'll list it for you, and you'll go through the evidence then when you know what these things are and once you've read the prompt. There are three elements at work here: ethos, pathos, and logos. Now you might say, hey, John, they didn't put those names in the instructions. Well, they're described without names. So they tell you what they are, but they don't give you these names. It's a little test. They want to see if you know the terms ethos, pathos, and logos. Why? Because the people grading these, the people who wrote these problems, are education professionals. They're probably English teachers, English professors, people who work with the written word. And they really want to know if you know these things. So evidence is ethos, as we see here. Pathos is appeals to emotion. Well, wait a minute, the second one is reasoning. Yeah, because that's logos, which is logic, and the third is stylistic or persuasive. So the College Board is being sneaky. They put ethos here, so the kid who's not paying attention, ethos, pathos, logos. Oh, okay, well, I remember ethos is evidence because I remember if you're ethical, you use evidence. That's fair and true. And pathos, I don't remember. Oh, well, it's the second one, so it must be reasoning. No, it's not. So it's a trap for the unwary. Logos is logic, so you can either just list it as ethos, logos, pathos, and explain what they are. You should put that in your essay. That ethos is evidence, pathos is appeals to emotion, logos is logic, because, again, the grader of your writing is not going to give you credit for knowing what ethos, pathos, and logos are unless you actually define those terms for them. They're going to assume that you don't know anything until you prove that you know something. The positive side of that is even what you think of as the most basic, obvious thing that you're thinking, oh, God, I learned that in 8th grade. I don't have to explain this on the SAT. Yes, you do, because you'll get credit for it. So don't cheat yourself out of credit. I've done that even on college papers where, oh, I don't have to say that. Of course the professor thinks I know that. No, he did not. And I didn't put it in the paper and I didn't get credit for it. It's okay. I still got a good grade, but not as good as if I had included that. But I digress. Anyway, so we have ethos, pathos, logos. So let's move down. The third element is logos, which is logic or reasoning. I'm sure logos and logic are the same root word. Logos is probably the root word of logic, so just remember it that way. It's logic or reasoning. So the first type of logos is comparing and contrasting. Compare and contrast. So you can show how one thing, a fact, a situation, or whatever, is different from another. So once you've shown how they're the same and shown how they're different, you can distinguish it in a way that helps your argument. So what I'm talking about here's an argument that I just wrote earlier. The argument that since we allow 18-year-olds, sometimes even 16-year-olds to vote, we should allow 18-year-olds to buy, possess, and imbibe alcoholic beverages is flawed. Voting is a safe pro-social act, whereas irresponsible drinking, common among teenagers, especially when paired with driving, is a dangerous anti-social act. So it's a common argument that people make that, well, 18-year-olds are new to drinking and new to driving, so if you make it legal for them to buy alcohol and drive a car, there's going to be a lot of drunk driving, etc. And about 30, 40 years ago, about 40 years ago, a lot of states did lower their drinking age to 18, and that's pretty much what happened. Anyway, don't need that specific example. If you disagree, that's fine with me. I'm not married to this idea. It's just an example that I used. But that's the kind of argument you're going to have to be able to analyze and say, oh, okay, the author draws a distinction between this, perhaps as in quotes, a prebuttal to the argument that, well, if I can go and drive a car and vote and I can join the military and get killed for my country, why can't I have a beer? It's a good question. Well, and that's an attempt to answer it. Okay. Reciprocity. The idea that obligations should be mutual. Basically, why should I honor a bargain when you won't hold up your end of the bargain? That's what reciprocity is, or reciprocation if you want to call it that. So, for example, why should the federal government support students with grants and subsidized loans if the students refuse to support the government by registering for the draft or other national service? If you are male, you do have to register with Selective Service, which is basically the federal draft board, to get any kind of student aid before you go away to college. So that is a real-life example of reciprocity. The third element, logos, logic or reasoning, continued. Okay, consistency is another type of logos. And the definition of consistency is the idea that a good intellectual position cannot contradict itself. In fact, most people would say, well, that's an anti-intellectual position because it doesn't make sense. It sounds like you haven't thought it through very well. However, the counter-argument to that is a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. That's used in lots and lots of books and editorials and things like that. You can also see contrast, comparison, and analogy. For example, it might be that, no, it only appears to contradict itself, such as the voting versus drinking comparison. They're not the same thing. So even if it is, perhaps something shouldn't be consistent for other reasons, or actually the same reason that it's not the same thing. Here we have in a really old Frankenstein movie, Frankenstein's monster. It's not Dr. Frankenstein. Frankenstein was the doctor who created the monster. They just never gave Frankenstein, what we call Frankenstein, they never gave him a name, so he just was Frankenstein's monster and people just called him Frankenstein. So he comes out, sees a pretty little girl who's throwing pretty flowers into a pond, and after he sees her doing that, he throws her into the pond because by his logic, oh, well, she was throwing pretty flowers into the water. It must be that pretty things belong in the water. She's pretty, so why don't I throw her in the water? And she doesn't know how to swim and drowns, so it's very sad. But anyway, we can have some examples here, such as a bumper sticker. Why do we call some animals pets and other animals dinner? Well, that's not very consistent. If we think we should be very nice to animals, that's great that we have some that we treat well and call pets, but other ones we kill and eat. That's a little weird. Or I remember seeing this when I was in high school. Punk rocker had this on her jacket and it said, "The system you hate is the system you support," which turns out to be true. But anyway, it shows a logical inconsistency. The same kind of people who often say, "I can't stand the government. I hate it. I can't believe I have to do this." But if there's any kind of threat, "Oh my God, you've got to support this country. What are you, some kind of, enemy of this country?" So a lot of the same people who hate the government so much are the first people to support it when something comes along. Cause and effect. So it's the idea that one thing will cause another, leading to a good or a bad result. When it's done questionably, it's the slippery slope argument. For example, there was a Supreme Court in the late 1980s called Bowers versus Hardwick. I believe it's from 1987. It was a decision that upheld sodomy laws, which were later overturned in another case in the early 2000s. And the idea is it made gay sex illegal. So the argument was basically that, well, if we make gay sex legal, then people who want to have bestial sex with animals or want to have sex with underage children, pedophiles, are going to demand the same right. And how can we stop it there where, if gay sex is legal, then we might have to make pedophilia legal. It's a silly argument. No, there's a big difference between, two grown men or two grown women who are in love doing whatever they want to do in their bedroom, and somebody and an animal who can't consent, or somebody who with a kid who's way too young to know what's going on and consent in any meaningful way. So it's questionable. The next example might be increasing the minimum wage will put money in the hands of people who will spend it, which will create increased demand for goods and services, which will create more jobs and profits, making the economy much better. So the idea is, okay, well, it would make sense if you pay minimum wage workers more money, they have more money. Well, what do people who don't have, still not going to have a lot of money, what do people who don't have much money do? They spend the money they have because they need things or want things. So it'll create an increased demand for goods and services because they have more money to spend, and that will create more jobs because someone has to manufacture these things, someone has to distribute them, someone has to sell them. All right, so that would probably make the economy better because more money would be moving around. The third element, logos, logic or reasoning, continued even further. We have comparison and analogy. So a definition is showing how one situation is like another to make a point. Here's an example. The crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s and 1990s was analogous to the problems created during the, in quotes, gin craze, when gin and other distilled spirits were created on a large scale in England in the late 1600s. Both problems were handled by law enforcement, laws regulating cocaine and gin, and publicity, anti-drug PSAs, and paintings such as Gin Lane and Beer Street. Those were paintings that showed all the things that happened if you were using gin, and would show all these horrible things because people got too drunk on gin, whereas Beer Street, everybody was literally, I guess, sober and very responsible and things like that. So the next one is a rhetorical question. A question that is asked without any expectation of an answer to illustrate a point. Is it fair that some people are born into poverty and starvation while others are born into opulence and luxury? Does anyone really expect you to answer that question? Of course it's not fair. There's no way you could answer that you thought that question was fair without looking like an idiot. That's the definition of a rhetorical question. I've covered this in another video, at least one, where your mother has probably asked you at some point, "Excuse me, do you expect me to walk around picking up after you for the rest of your life?" Don't you dare answer yes. That's not going to bode well for you if you do that. So obviously you're going to say, "No, Mom, I'm sorry, I'll pick up right now." Okay. Anyway, did you find this video useful? If you did, please like it and subscribe to this channel. Neither action costs you anything, and you'll be alerted about my new videos. Why do I care? It's simple. YouTube doesn't let me share any ad revenue unless I have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of view time in a year. While many people are watching these, I don't have 4,000 hours of watch time. I don't have anywhere near 1,000 subscribers. For the same reasons, you are not only welcome, but encouraged to share links to this video, put it in playlists, etc. I'm always happy to read and respond to constructive criticism or suggestions for new videos. I reserve the right to delete comments from and block those who specialize in destructive criticism, trolls, or things that are off topic, spammers and disturbed people. So you can contact me on my cell phone, 415-623-4251. You can email me at john@johnlinnebaugh.com. You can mail me at 1859 Powell Street, number 109, San Francisco, California, 94133. Thank you so much for watching. If you have a copyright issue or any other issue with this, please just contact me and I'll gladly discuss it with you. Contact me, Facebook, Instagram, email, phone. Facebook is http://www.facebook.com/Linnebaugh tutoring, all one word. Instagram is www.instagram.com/john.linnebaugh.tutoring. And phone is 415-986-7355. That's my home office. Email is john@johnlinnebaugh.com. Website is www.johnlinnebaugh.com. And I do have a locals.com page where I will be putting up some exclusive content. Right now, it's just the same content you can get on this YouTube channel. But anyway, it's one way to help support me is by subscribing to my locals.com page. You can also give me money directly through PayPal and through Patreon, etc. So those would all be good things if you'd like to help me out with that. If you don't, that's cool too. So hope you have a good day. Thanks.